Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. The first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to be talking about storytelling and stories and how they're constructed and what makes them work. So we'll be discussing that in the second hour. Tomorrow, we have our friends from Hedge on. They have some new products to talk about, new updates. And so they're going to be here with us tomorrow. And then Saturday, of course, we have the education hours from 8 to 10. And then those are not on YouTube, but then at 10 o'clock, we'll come back on, jump back onto YouTube. And our own Erica Sandstrom is going to be talking about green screen in the classroom. So she's got some great little ways that she uses it for K through 12. It should be a fun show. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Absolutely. Our first one comes from a name we're familiar with. Andy Carluccio in Washington, D.C. says, how should Smart Gallery work visually in Office Hours 2.0? I'm writing the controller for it, and I know we want to show engaged panelists and no black boxes, but how much moving and rearranging should there be, and what are the rules, what are its rules in an ideal world?
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting complexities with this. So as a technical cutter, you kind of don't want things to change too often, but you want the gallery to be updated and full and with engaged people. So ideally, as soon as someone turns off the camera, they would be removed from the smart gallery entirely. What we've also been doing is, as the panel gets smaller sometimes, is reducing the grid size. So for those who haven't seen it, the normal smart gallery is a 4x4 grid, and then sometimes we go down to a 3x3 grid or a 2x2 grid. And this is where the complexity comes in, is can that be automatic, or is that something we have to keep manually updating as well? So ideally, the smart gallery would change as the panelists turn off the camera, and it would change grid size as the panel gets smaller, depending upon what's needed. But as a person who cuts, I also don't like things changing in position, because I want to know where people are so I can go directly to them if I have to. So it's an interesting balance.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, thinking about the design of a gallery, and I guess this smart gallery that y'all are talking about is 16 4x4, something like that.
It can be 16.3, but it can be 16.9 or 4.
Okay.
Those are the options.
Yeah, I mean, if anything is open, it'd be nice to maybe see the main host and primary guest in the center, possibly, or oriented towards that, and maybe sort of the rest of the panel around those, and then gluing something like other office hours meters or other features or something like that out in the outer corners. So it's not really the same design as a Zoom standard blocky gallery, but at least the focus could be in the center, the primary folks that are talking.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that for me, I'm so used to having the speaker be at the top. I'd probably lean towards it, maybe top middle though. But it doesn't have to be top corner, but I think top middle, not the speaker, but the whoever's the host. Yeah, and the smart gallery is, I think that all the stuff like meters and everything else, that won't be, I don't think that's shown now, but I don't think it'll be shown in the smart one, so the smart gallery. And so I think that's there. One thing I've thought about is whether if we have a guest, so if we have a general discussion like today, we still use the start the smart gallery through the second hour. But if we have a guest, I've been thinking about the possibility of moving to super source just all the time if we're going to go back to something, of just the handful of people that might be there to do it. Mostly because when we have guests, our numbers in the second hour drop a little bit, and it may make more sense to, rather than shuffling around, to just really focus on the guest, because that's really what ends up happening. And so it might not be, I think the low numbers that we see are generally in that second hour when there's a guest and people are, we're asking questions of the guest. So I think it makes sense. But so I think that I've been thinking about turning that more into a traditional show. Like it just looks like a regular show. And if people are asking questions from the panel, we bring them on, to do that. One of the things that I've also been thinking about is when we have guests, if panelists are in here and they ask their own questions, we let them ask their own questions. like we just let them bring up, like they can have that moment and talk to the guest. So if they have the question, they can do it, as opposed to us reading it. It's conundrum that I think about a lot, is the panelists, the reader reading questions from the panelists when the panelists are sitting there, that they could ask them themselves. So that's still open thing. I think for me, you know, seeing the last 16 or 9 or 4 people that talked. I mean, I think if we have 16 or more, then it's the last 16 that talked, and I think that as soon as it goes under 16, it just immediately, what I'd love to do is have it switch to 9. Like it's now a 9 up. If it's under 16 people in the group, and then it's the last 9 to talk. And I would try to, as has been said before, have it change as little as possible, and probably have it be one of those things that it just takes when a new person talks that hasn't talked before or hasn't talked as much, they replace the person with the longest time in the system. Go ahead, Chris.
It's an interesting question. You started to touch on it there. If you have 16 and one person drops, and now you're at 15, to jump from 15 down to 9, it means that there's 6 people, quote unquote, in the dark. And they're there. And yes, you could have some logic that says, when
it doesn't affect their experience either. Like we're not watching that.
No, I understand that. But it seems weird that those 6 people disappeared all at once. You might experiment with a certain tolerance. Like, I'm okay with 1 black square in the lower right-hand corner. Or maybe it's 2. Maybe you have a couple of spare machines standing by that have like a show logo and maybe some stats. Like, maybe we record those folks like just nodding, and then when they drop out, they just replaces them with them just sitting there going. Alex, do you know how often we all do that?
I know. See, the thing is, I'm just saying we could automate the whole thing. So you could have like a 1-minute loop of you just doing your thing, and so when you drop out, into it, it just swaps you for the playback. So
the most famous example of that was one time when Preto recorded himself for a couple of minutes, but forgot that he raised his hand in his recording, and you're like, John, and he was in the bathroom or whatever.
Can I tell you the seed of the panelist view was that moment. Like I was like, we have to stop using these hands.
but I wouldn't mind a little tolerance. Like, I don't think nobody's going to turn off the show if there's 1 black square in the lower right-hand corner. So maybe you go to 14 before you drop to 9. I don't know.
Yeah.
It would be cool to have graphical elements that you start filling empty holes with. Like, here's a show logo, or here is, stats about the show, or what time we had whatever.
Maybe 2, to your point, I think if we had 2 or 3 different things that look like they're show designed.
Fillers. Yeah.
Fillers that pop in.
If only we had a few Mac Minis.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe if we can find some graphical way to make that work, I could.
It just seems severe to drop from 16 to 9 just because one person had to go answer a business call or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And our goal every day will be to have 20.
Sure, of course. And the other question I had for Richard, if possible, Richard, does it bother you that you could cut to the smart gallery and have people in different locations in it? Is that what I heard you saying?
No, it's more as a cutter, having the ability to remember that, say, Chris is at 6, Prado is at 5, to be able to go in an emergency to that direct person. It's very handy.
I haven't touched the UI in a long time.
Yeah, so it's helpful in that, and we don't often use it, so it's probably a lower priority than anything else. So I would prefer to have a complete smart gallery as the main thing. But as Alex said, updating it as little as possible. One of the problems we have at the moment is that as panelists, we need to remember to look at the camera more consistently, even when we're off air, because it kind of kills the smart gallery. And I'm as bad at it as anyone else.
Yeah, it's hard because sometimes we're even researching I know I'm sometimes trying to set something up for one of the questions. So there's a little bit of a process there. Go ahead, Bill.
I think we should do a reverse Academy Awards and have seat fillers, but instead of anonymous people holding it for celebrities. I think anytime somebody leaves a panel, you ought to put in like Gal Gadot or Ryan Reynolds.
No,
No, I'm gonna get a Mickey. I'm gonna get a Mickey loop and play it into my square.
What we could do is we could have people set up their cameras that sometimes are on the panel, or even other people that just don't necessarily want to sit on the panel, but they want to be a seat filler. And then what it does is we approve them, like we go, okay, that looks good and it's a good representation. And when someone drops out, it just goes and randomly grabs one and just sticks them in there and has just puts them and drops them into the thing. That would be really good. They're just sitting there.
Bring Chris Comfort in listening intently.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next question. I'm just going to say it.
We might.
I could totally.
We could totally do that.
Totally do that while in a Teams meeting. Just be there for
it. We've all done that in the Teams meeting, but I think that is anyway. All right, cool. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he asks, many large venues are introducing sensory refuges for those on the autism spectrum and with related issues. Should we as producers be mindful of overloading our audience? Should all events have to cater to the lowest common denominator in that sense?
Go ahead, Richard.
There's an interesting trend in theater where we make special autism-friendly performances, and it's less about changing the content and more about changing the social conventions around the performance. So you no longer have to be quiet in the theater. The audience are aware that they can stand up, make noise. You don't have to force quiet and silent behavior. And you relax. It's called a relaxed performance. You relax a lot of those restrictions. And the performers understand it as well, that all the normal social conventions around sitting quietly in the theater are removed. And it takes that stress level away. So it makes the content not necessarily have to be simpler, but it does tend to allow for anyone to access it without kind of levels of stress. At the same time, we often reduce the volume level and of special effects and little things like that, just to help ease that kind of transition for people.
David?
I would encourage us to not think about those who are on the autism spectrum or with related challenges as being the lowest common denominator, but instead think about how can we make our productions multi-access, multi-accessible.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think I'm necessarily in that ballpark, but I definitely find being around a lot of people to be stressful, and the best way that I found to handle it is just stay home. So anyway, I think the best thing we can do is provide better virtual experiences so that I can do more of it without actually having to go into a big space. All right, next question.
Andy Kokendorfer is up next from Viera, Florida, and this time he says, what is LiveU LRT and how is it different from other cellular bonding services?
Yeah, so LiveU has been doing this for a long time. I mean, maybe 15 years or more. And so what they've gotten really good at is bonding, it's a particular challenge to take a bunch of different modems, and all those modems have different jitter rates and all kinds of other, jitter and latency rates. And they have to figure out how to pull all those together and turn them into one video feed that pops out the other end. And they've been doing this for a long time, and they've gotten really good at it. And so it seems like what they figured out to do is, hey, we're doing this in our hardware. We can only make so much money with hardware. Why don't we license it? The thing that we figured out how to do so that anybody can do it. And so I haven't read the white paper. There's a white paper. I tried to download it before the show, and I didn't get through it. But what I will say is it's probably very close to something like SRT, except it is it really takes into more of account of many different inputs constantly changing and how it manages it. So I think that it could be really interesting. It's actually something I'm actually pretty interested in. I saw it when it came out, and I didn't pay much attention to it. And now that you brought it up, I feel like maybe we'll try to get the guys on to talk about it because it could be really interesting transport. They do really well. I would say that it is the most reliable cellular transport that I've seen. Although if you gave me a PepWave with Zixi, I would take that over a LiveU. So it's just depends on what you're looking for. Next question.
Next one comes from Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK. He says, I'm looking at the Linsoul in-ear monitor headphones mentioned before on office hours. Would there be any downside to buying the same model with the built-in microphone? Since the extra cost is negligible, it's less than $2.
Go ahead, Chris.
Save your money. Now, I'm using them. I think this is the ones I have. The only downside to buying it with a mic is now you've switched from using a TRS plug to a TRRS plug. And there are some places that you can't plug a TRRS in reliably, 100% have it work. So I would just keep it, but buy what you actually need, not what you think you need. Although quite often I say the exact opposite.
And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that I got a couple of them at different levels, and I kind of wish I'd gotten them with the mics just so that they were there and they were available, but the chances of me using them would be very low. I think that making good headphones is one thing, making good microphones, especially at that distance, is very hard, and not many. I think the best ones are the, I can't think of the name of them, but it's not them, but they're not, but many of them sound horrible,
Yeah. I think the other thing is if you start buying a bunch of microphones you don't need, you might end up a little bit like Paul Wallace.
Now, Etymotic is the one. Their little threes headsets were some of the best ones that I used for years for calls. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I was just going to drop a link in the chat here, but for those watching online, DPA has a good diagram, and it shows sort of how, where you're placing the mic on your head and how the frequency response varies. So if you put something way back here in your ear, it's going to sound different than on your forehead or a headset or a lav. So I'll put that in the chat.
And I think that these ones just it's like a traditional headset one where the mic is just on the wire coming down.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. Most days here on the panel. Anyone use Tubicon? Seems to be an alternative to Switcher Studio, but has NDI integration.
Looks really cool. Yeah. So, I mean, this does look. I looked at it after you posted the question, and it does look like Switcher Studio, but having NDI is pretty interesting. Go ahead, John.
Well, also Cinemaker, which we've seen before, has just been placed in the Zoom App Store, and they have NDI in addition to a Zoom Green Room as a video source in their program.
That's awesome. So they've started to add so that the NDI is working now.
Yeah. They were here early on, as you recall. They had some tech issues, but they've gotten stable enough to be in the Zoom marketplace, and they have the ability to bring in the camera from your device. They have the ability to bring in 4 Wi-Fi iPhones, NDI, and then they can pull a Zoom room as a green room, and anybody who's in that green room, Zoom room, can be brought into the Cinemaker, and then the output of that goes into the Zoom meeting that you're sending to.
Wow, a lot going on there. Yeah, So we should definitely check it out. Next question.
Serge Blondin here on the panel from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, says best way to share USB audio from a Flow 8 to 2 separated Macs.
I'll go with Stefan.
I don't think that there is a direct way to do this, but you could use a loopback to kind of make a not a switch, but route the audio to 2 different audio devices and catch it from there and bring it into your second Mac.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it in software if you can avoid that. I think the Flow 8 has like 2 TRS monitor outputs and 2 XLR outs. The best way is to just send it out in that way to the different computers.
Good,
unless you needed the 10, because the USB output on that does like 10 separate channels, I think. So if you needed all of those, that would be the reason to push it over to the other computer in software. But if you only need like the main mix or the monitor mix, then you should just use those analog outputs.
Go ahead, Chris.
I don't know what the answer is, but something like an audio version of NDI. I'm sure something exists. I don't know what it is, but I would find that useful just even in my little setup here.
Like Dante.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm looking for.
Do you have to go that heavy though?
Huh?
I don't want to switch analog and back to digital. I want to stay digital all the way.
Yeah,
if possible.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I was going to say because there's no price point on it, then Dante would be the best way to do it because that's the easiest way to share between multiple computers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you had Loopback and Dante virtual sound card on both computers, you could pull those out and send them to Dante. The only thing I would add to that is some kind of alternate like the little USB to not to use it. I wouldn't actually plug anything into it. Maybe a backup stereo from it. But the main reason I do that is you need one piece of hardware that has a Dante chip on it to clock it. Otherwise, it's everything falls apart. But if you just take that little, you can always use them. I probably have 40 of them in the office. This little USB to two, to XLR, in and out. So they're like $150. You throw that into one of the computers, into the system or in the network, and then you use loopback to send it into Dante and have the other side on Dante pull all those out. And that would get all the channels in and out between the two without having any. Works in my head. So I think that it would, and that would mean that you'd have a stereo backup coming out of the Flow 8 into the second computer. So you'd have two channels there going in that were available to you if you wanted them. Does that make sense, Serge?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yep. Next question.
Dan Huber's up next. He says, "What's the oldest piece of tech that you still use today?"
Go ahead, John.
Me. No. And I'm older than most of you guys. This is a Post-it note pad, and it's probably not going to look right because it's a green screen. And my trusty ball writer that I've carried with me for over 30 years. And you may recall in the early days of office hours, we talked about putting Post-it notes on the mirror for notes for Zoom. This was the famous pad that did that.
Okay, go ahead, Bill.
Well, behind me in the museum, there's things that are very, very, very old and represent technology, but I don't use them every day. So I was thinking about it, and I'm pretty sure that my Neumann TLM 103, which I bought around the turn of the last century, probably in 1999 or 2000, is the oldest thing that continuously gets used every single day, sits in the voice booth now, and there's probably not a week goes by that we don't do a few spots for somebody, either my wife or I, in the voice booth. So microphones. Good ones last forever.
Go ahead, John.
So 1985, I was a freshman in college, and I bought the HP, this is the 41CX, and the cool thing about this is it's got ROM cartridges like the modern day consoles, and it also has a card reader like a floppy disk that plugs onto the back of the unit. So this slides in, and now you can store on magnetic media. But all that has given way to the app that runs on the phone now. But it's RPN, so it's X inter Y operative, and it's way better than having an equal sign. There's no equal sign on a real calculator.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
1978 for me. I bought my Neumann U87. It was the first thing I bought when I decided to go into audio business exclusively from radio. And it's still with me. I had one kind of makeover on it to refresh the capacitors in it from Gotham when they were around, but served me well, continues to serve me well. I know it really well, and it stays with me.
Here goes Sky.
Pencil. And I know that sounds silly, but it's actually
the same pencil.
It's a pencil.
No, but is it the same one? It's got to be the oldest one that you've had.
That didn't. No, it's the oldest piece of tech. Oldest piece of tech, and I'm riffing off of Graham Kerr when he looked at my computer and said, "Yes, bring in your machine." And I never thought of my computer as a machine, but he's kind of right. It's a means by which to communicate from one point to the other. And at some point, we didn't have the pencil, so that was in front of me, and it's an old piece of tech. So there you are.
I had a pad of paper next to me yesterday, and I literally pushed it over and set down my iPad, and then just started taking notes on my iPad. I was like, I'm not going to put this on paper because then I'll lose it. Nigel.
So if Sky's allowed a pencil, I'm going to talk about the pen that I got for my bar mitzvah from someone I didn't really like, and I have tried losing that pen for many decades. And every sort of 7 or 8 years, I open a box and there's that pen again. And it's the only gift I have left from my bar mitzvah. The other piece of tech I would tell you was my Blu-ray player, or our Blu-ray player, broke the other day. And I guess it's from, 2005. It was one of the first ones. Mm-hmm. And there came the real question of, do I now replace this because of all the Blu-rays and DVDs that we still have? What is the break-even point? In the end, we went and bought one. And it's quite hard to buy one that's cheap.
It is. I just bought one recently because there's a handful of things like Kundun, Henry V, Gods Must Be Crazy, not available on any public, any digital format. And the digital, or I think Henry V is, but it's horrible. The compression is horrible. And so I bought one. It's like $350 for something that I realized it cost me like $100 a disc to have it there. Go ahead, Chris.
The oldest piece of technology that I'm currently am sitting in front of and use every day is actually this chair. I've had this chair for easily 20 years, but in terms of something that's actually plugged in, this microphone is the only thing that is currently sitting in front of me, well, except for the iMac, that I had prior to the pandemic. You have caused me to buy a lot of stuff.
The oldest one that I think that I have used regularly is probably the USB Pre 2. I think I got the first one, the one that's sitting in my office, I think is the first one I got. And it was first of like 60. So, but it's those things are just machines or just, rocks. Anyway, next question.
Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, and here on the panel, says, what would be a good alternative hardware to the ATEM Mini?
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, before moving over to the Blackmagic system, I would use the Roland VR50 HD. Now, it's a bit big in comparison to the ATEM Mini, but Roland have their VR1 HD, which has some very good comparisons online. Our lovely friend John Barker has a nice video comparing the two between. So,
you go ahead, John.
I'm not sure what these work like because we haven't gotten them out yet, but we've used a lot of Roland in our Parks green screen studios, and they've just come out with the Aerocaster, which is a live streaming system, and they also have a personal video system for presentations. It used to be the UMVC 02, and they've added the web part to it. So I'm looking forward to seeing those when they're available, and would love feedback if anybody uses that Roland new gear.
Yeah, I feel like we should get them on. They really fulfill a very unique, like they've just figured out this little seam that they're going to exploit, and they've done it really, really well. Go ahead, Chris.
I think the best alternative to the ATEM Mini would be the ATEM Mini Extreme.
Sorry. That's a good one. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm sorry, I'm recovering from that laugh you did. It was sort of like anyhow, bad guy on a Bond film. I think, see, there it is. I think that the Roland calls to me. It seems to be the one that fits the best need. That new Aerocast is really cool looking, audio, video, and does it nicer, I think, than the ATEMs do.
Okay, go ahead, Sky.
Yes, I put the Roland in the chat so that, I need to put it in the event chat, so that we can all take a look at it. If those that haven't seen it, they've got a long history in audio switching. So now that we're looking for alternatives, so they may have been able to bring that history into the next generation of a need.
Yeah. Next question.
Jeremy White, just in Virginia, says, for Alex, what brand 8x8 HDMI Matrix do you and Danny Law use?
I think we both have the Monoprice. So Monoprice makes an 8x8 that I think we're both using. There's another company that someone else, because that one's really back ordered, that somebody else, I want to say VG Tech, but I'm not certain, that has another 8x8. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I will say that the Mac Minis don't get along with it as much as it's that quad pixel thing that the Apple that the Macs do. I seem to have trouble having it see through that, and so I have to have something on the other side that I know can see it correctly for it to actually get through the pipeline. Because it's trying to pass through, and so I've had a little bit of trouble with that compatibility. But overall, it's been pretty nice. I just wish it was a 16x16, like or an 8x16 would be really good. I mean, I ran out of outputs, like you always do with a router. I ran out of outputs really, really quickly, and there's just not that many options for routing HDMI effectively. But it really does take a lot of pressure off the system when you have it, because you can just go, I'm just going to send this to all these different places. It makes it a lot faster. Next question.
Vincent Gerald in Louisiana is up with the next question. He says, what portable setup is Alex using this morning?
So the portable setup I have, I don't have it's not fully set up because these lights behind me, they don't use the standard light screw in, and that's the one problem with this hotel. It's got better bandwidth. I think we've noticed better bandwidth than yesterday. But it's like 100 down and 250 up on the Wi-Fi. So that's why I came back to this hotel, even though it's a long drive from where I need to be. All for you. Anyway, so the I'm using two Pavotubes the 6Cs here, and those have worked really, really well for me for the travel, because they're super small, they're durable. I don't have to put them in anything. I just they snap together, and then I just throw them in my carry-on. I have a Mix-Pre 2 with noise assist, because there's a big air conditioning fan that I can't turn off here. So that, fortunately, I don't think you hear very much of that. And then I'm using a Countryman H6 Brio, a Logitech Brio for the camera. And I have my carry-on, which is a hard case carry-on. It's a Away, one of those Away carry-ons. And it just happens to put it at the right height. It seems to works in all hotels that way. So as long as I have that hard carry-on, I can set my laptop on it, and I just got a little 14-inch laptop. When I can put the lights in, I have two Aperture 7Cs that I use to color the background. But in this case, I'm just letting it do whatever it's going to do. And I have now
use those battery powered.
Well, I did yesterday by accident. I kept on trying to turn off the lights, and they kept on I tried to turn off the lights with the light switches to take them out, so they'd cool down, and then I could take them out. And they kept on turning back. They'd turn off for a second, then they turn back on again. And I was like, "What is it doing?" And then I realized, oh, right, it's got batteries. So so I haven't used them on purpose. How long do they last?
I ran one for about 2 hours, which could have got you through a show. Oh my! But I had it very dim.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so that's I found out about. I realized that by accident yesterday. But
you realize if it doesn't screw in, you just have to put a string around it and hang it.
Yeah, exactly. I almost went to like a Target and just got some light fixtures, to put in here, and then I would have just left them behind. I'm not going to take them around with me. But anyway, what I will say is that I put all of this stuff. I pack it all into a little case, almost all of it except for the lights. And I do have some light stands. I don't need to use them in this hotel because of the weird desk that is here. But I can now set this. It used to be a real stress thing, but this little thing with my clothes for a couple days, I can set this up in about 10 minutes, in the hotel. And so it's not like now that I know how to do it, and all the cables are in one place, they're in one little bag, and there's not very much to set up. I can set it up pretty quickly. So it's good. Anyway, that's what I got. Let's see. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers, Madison, Wisconsin, says, "What is one skill in our profession you possess but never get to use?"
Nigel.
Yeah. So for my distant past, I used to be a systems programmer and systems engineer in a computer company. And so I really got fairly technical, and I don't really use any of those skills anymore, any of my networking skills or any of that stuff, unless someone tries to patronize me at work. And occasionally I meet someone who tries to go what I would call horsey, ducky with me for too long on something fairly technical. And then I start having a little fun, but I only do it for a while.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Talk like a radio DJ, because that's what I used to be. And nowadays that's just not done. You don't talk like a radio guy, but, and that's the reason, by the way. But occasionally I can enforce a meeting by using that next level of voice. So I kind of break the rule a little bit. So if I'm on comms and I need to get somebody's attention and they're not paying attention, I engage radio voice.
Sky?
I was going to say juggling, and I can only juggle 3 items. I can't juggle 5 and many other things. But I realized, no, I still do it because I was on set with Corporate America this week. And boy, you're juggling so many things and keeping everything going and in the air all at the same time. So I guess I still do use juggling, just not, beanbags.
Go ahead, Bill.
The longer you do this, the more things you'll get. I'll pick one of many, which is the ability to troubleshoot connection problems with SCSI drives. I don't think I'm ever going to have to do that again.
I used to be able to weld really well, so I don't know if I can anymore. It's been a couple decades, but you grew up on a farm, you learn how to put things together. So I was really good at smiley faces. I don't know how to use any of the high tech stuff like MIG and TIG. I just use stick anyway. But that's what I kind of grew up on. Go ahead, John.
The codes for modem control, the AT commands. I used to be able to talk that language, and at one point I was explaining to the class, and the person said, well, why do we care? And I realized the need to program the codes into your modem to auto dial, pause, and that had gone away a long time ago.
I used to be able to know what was going wrong with my connection by the noises that it made when the modem, because the modem goes, and I would know what it was doing while it was like, that's the problem there. I know what's going on. So
little unknown fact, the Hayes DC modem was built on the kitchen table of Glenn Circus, who had failed out of Georgia Tech, went into the Navy. When he got out of the Navy, came back, and they built the modem. And when they were trying to figure out what the commands were, Glenn had just left the Navy. And she said, well, to get the attention of the modem, just say attention. And part of the reason he failed out is he helped run the radio station there that was totally controlled by their telephone circuit. And that's what eventually led to the DC Hayes modem, and a very successful story.
Oh, that's great. Next question.
Somebody should look up, there's a dial-up animation of a 300 baud modem connecting to the internet that has animation with it. It's great. It's online somewhere. James Hutchins in Dublin, Ireland. Recommendations, please, for sharing dual screens between 3 different computers. Would an HDMI Matrix do the trick?
Go, Jesse.
Yeah, there's no reason to plug in, HDMI cables. There's, I would say you could start with like remote desktop software like Parsec, and you're able to set up team computers that multiple folks can access, so you can start there. But if you're in a production environment, you'd probably help yourself out a lot to learn what NDI is and how to create a NDI multi-view, and then you just share that over your network. Yep, that's the short answer.
Yeah, I will admit that I tend to lean towards hardware, so I probably get a 2-in something out, 4 out, 2-in, 4 out HDMI switcher that I can just kind of pop through, just because I've had enough issues. I don't like NDI on my network, so that's the problem. It's not a good citizen. So unless I'm going to build it with its own network that it gets to live on, I don't like my computers plugged into it. Next question.
Daniel Jaskowski in Dusseldorf, Germany says, any of you working in or doing research about Sandbox event platforms like ohyay?
Go ahead, David.
So I wasn't until I saw this question, and I immediately signed up for ohyay. It's really interesting. You have rooms. This is a background that I created, and you can see that my camera is in here. They even have fake cameras so that you can set rooms up ahead of time. You can set cameras up with perspective, which is really interesting to me. There's a green room. You can see I've got 3 fake people in here. The degree to which you can customize every single thing in here is just mind-boggling. Really, really interesting.
We did test most of these. In fact, with ohyay, I think a bunch of us jumped in and built some rooms and kind of went through that process. And I think that it may work for some folks. I think that I personally found it upsetting. like it was just like, it was the lack of structure for me was like, I just got upset. Like, I'll never go to, like, it's not like I didn't like it. It's kind of like I would never go to an event if someone did that. Like, as soon as if I saw the ohyay platform, I would immediately go, nope, I'm not going to do that. Like I don't care what they have to say. so like it's that bad for me. I don't think it would be necessarily that bad but it definitely has a visceral reaction for some people. I wasn't the only one in the group that was like, this is going to make me crazy. Part of it for me is multiple contrast. So what happens, the problem really is you've got a picture. Now you're putting a bunch of people into it, and some of them are dark and some of them are bright and some of them are and I've become super sensitive to this idea that our frontal brain and our lower brain fight a lot in all the things that we're doing in this spectrum. And when we do something that is skeuomorphic, like but basically a lot of these platforms are some version of skeuomorphism. that our front brain goes, oh, this is going to be great because it's going to be like being at home, and then the lower brain's going, this is not at home at all. like this is not what I signed up for, and I really believe that the space that builds between those two is called depression. And people, it actually sucks people, like it makes them upset, and they may not know it, but it agitates them, and so I think that the thing that watching all of these different structures, because I'm in almost many different many VC platforms every day. And what really works is that for me, for Zoom, is that it gets out of the way. It's just a grid. We're not putting people somewhere else. We can move them around if we don't like them, which we couldn't do for a long time, which I'm really glad we can, because I'm constantly moving people around and getting it to where I want it to be. And I think that the other thing is that it's really important that the person talking is at the top. I think that one of the things, like when you go into the view, having everybody across the film strip at the top, not everybody does that, and it means that everybody's eyes are going down all the time. And so I think that there's some really subtle things that I found in this structure that works really well. And then I feel like if I want to go out of that structure, that's what we're using Zoom ISO and OSC, and we're going to design something that is specific to what we're talking about. But we did look at these. We've looked at a couple other ones, and I think that maybe I'm not the right person to look at them, but for me it was they were literally upsetting. so it was to me. But I do think that they're a cool idea, and we were excited about them when they came out, and looked at them. It just then a lot of us, I think, kind of moved away from them. Next question.
Next one comes from our own Sky Gleason here in the panel from Seattle, Washington. He says, John Ittelson introduced me to the Monterey Convention Center's huge stage for live production. When can office hours have a show from this amazing space? What would be the value in that, he wonders.
Go ahead, Sky.
I'm just going to tease it because I did talk with Madeline Smithberg, and the question is, how could we cook with 1,000 people on a 50-foot video wall? Mm-hmm. So I'll leave it at that. What do you think?
Go ahead, John.
The studio is up and running. They've had quite a few successful shows. Doug Phillips is the manager of the Monterey Convention Center, and come on down. Sky can attest that it's a fun place to be, and I think Alex has some ideas.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a lot of possibilities of how can an artist, and we're hoping to do some tests in that area. Of how a music artist or how a performance artist, a comedian, might be able to interact with lots of people all at one time and have it be really immersive. Where it's not just a little screen in front of them, but it's like this huge thing where they actually feel like they're there. And so I think that there's some interesting possibilities there. Next question.
Todd Davis is up next from Hutchinson, Kansas, and Todd says Alex talks about his 8 monitor setup from time to time. Have any of you tried the 42-inch quad LG with a bunch of different computers? Are you using Synergy or something else for the KVM?
Go ahead, John.
Several people on the panel are using the LG, and they do use Synergy, so they have the four different machines with Synergy to control. And I'm looking at switching over to that side. There's a bunch of new screens coming out that do this as well. So it makes a lot of sense for a compact area.
Yeah, I mean, I use Synergy as well. I did learn that if Synergy if two devices that used to have Synergy or have Synergy get suddenly put on another network, like I had to move a network around, your mouse stops working. like you just completely will not, you can't plug it into the computer directly and have it work. So that scared me a lot about Synergy, but I still use it every day. So I mean, it's how I get around. I don't like the quads because a larger monitor with quads, because my office is there's all kinds of things moving around. And I like the fact that every 24 inches I can change the angle or move it or play with it. And they're not like in a grid. They're like where they make sense with all the other things that are going on. They're getting kind of moved around and stuff like that. So I like all my monitors on arms. Next question.
Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California says, I have 100 squares of the 1 foot by 1 foot foam sound panels. I want to cover a 6 foot corner and use what's left on the rest of the wall opposite the talent. Should I place them in a solid pattern, one right next to another, or checkerboard them to cover more wall?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Tim, you're on to the answer right there, because bass builds up in the corners, and you need to set some foam in there to cut down on the amount of bass. But The rest of it is the higher frequencies that tend to need to be dispersed and diffused. I would checkerboard it because it's going to need to cover a larger area. Bass doesn't care that you're checkerboarding, so you don't have to checkerboard the corners.
Go ahead, Bill.
If nothing else, I've learned over the course of all of my years of doing audio stuff and amateur building studios and things like that, it is that I don't try to solve problems in theory before I get to the actual location if it's possible to do it the other way. So my suggestion would be don't put them up, get into the room. When it's set up with the way it is, listen to it and see what your actual problems are. You will probably be mostly right if you've studied this a while, and things like slapback echo or the fact that you have parallel hard walls and there might create standing waves. Those are all things you can think through ahead of time, but the actual reality of how the room reacts to where your sound is coming from, where the speakers are positioned, where your microphones are, will be unique in almost every circumstance. So I'm a great believer in starting with nothing, adding things, and then listening. And if you want to go to the extent of getting a generator, like a pink noise generator, and sweeping frequencies and seeing where you have issues technically, you can do that. But I guess what I'm saying is don't try to fight problems you don't know for sure you're going to have. Definitely fight the ones you know you have after it's set up.
I have to admit that I've baffled almost every office I've had in the last 20 years. So I just, every time I walk into an office within a week, it's all baffled. And I use, I think I have the same 2x4 Sonics that I've had for half of them have started years ago and just get moved from one building to another or one room to another. I will baffle the entire wall that's not on the camera if I have enough of it and if I have bass traps. If you baffle the whole thing without bass traps, you'll sound muddy. So if you can't capture the bass, then you need to do it every other so that you get a little bit of high end response back. So those are the things that I kind of look at there. The other thing I would say also is I use staples. I don't use glue, and that's why I can still use these for years, is because you just tear them off the wall. It's a lot easier to spackle staples than they recommend, like this S curve of glue, and that ensures that you're going to have to replace the whole wall. Like when you're done. Next question.
Next one comes from George E. Kennedy Jr. in Washington, D.C., and he says, any update on usage of the Monoprice Blackbird HDMI Matrix in your workflow?
Yeah, I don't use it for anything I generally don't use it for anything that's going out to you. I'm using it for all the other monitors and trying to get things to places that I want them to go to. And that's been pretty effective. Again, the only issue I've had is that the Mac Minis, their little quad pixel thing confuses if I just plug it in and then plug a monitor in, but if I plug something in that's going to force a resolution, then it works fine. So, but it has to be on the other end of the matrix and already set up before, or just never comes out the other end. So it's a little tweaky in that sense, but I don't think I could do what I'm doing without it. Go ahead, John.
Has anybody built something? Because that's a big problem I have. I'd like the Mac Mini to assume these are its monitors, but have another set of plugs where I could unplug and plug in different things, because I'm constantly fighting that battle, particularly when we're out doing things in the parks, because we're pulling monitors and putting them in and everything gets reorganized. Yeah.
I mean, the way that I've done it, the easiest way to do it is put a decimator on the other end, and you just plug the Mac Mini in. The decimator will tell it what it wants, and then Mac Mini will always kind of go into that space, but it's obviously not.
Well, I did that, but 3 decimators is, I could buy a lot for that.
I know. That's it's because Apple did this thing where it's cool because you get nice anti-aliased edges, but lots of monitoring systems don't understand what to do with that. And that's the what Apple's doing there confuses a lot of hardware, and that's the trouble I've had so far. Because if I plug a PC into it or plug anything else into it, it works just fine. it's the Macs, and specifically, it appears to be Monterey is what actually it's doing something new, because it was working in Big Sur just fine, and then in Monterey it doesn't.
That's what did me in, because we had it and everything's working fine. Went to Monterey, and now it's a disaster at one of our studios.
I will admit that Monterey has not been my happiest upgrade. So anyway,
again, that's the operating system, not the Bay.
I love the Bay. The Monterey, the Bay is always an upgrade, but Monterey, the operating system has been a little rough. Next question.
Jonas Dotel in Stuttgart says, "What's the best way to constantly power a DJI ROJIN RS2?"
Go ahead, Bill.
So here's the question. You've got this gimbal and it's designed for handheld shots while you're walking and you want to constantly power it. I don't know for how long. Typically, the internal onboard batteries will do sometimes an hour, sometimes a couple of hours, depending on the draw of the camera you have on it. My strategy in the past has been look for those anchor style batteries that have both a output that I can adapt to the camera. I will strap it or gaffer's tape it to the handle so that that is stable and isn't affecting the top. Get the lightest weight power cable for USB into the camera to keep it going. And then my goal is to get a battery pack that also has a charger built in. So if you really need to set it down and run it for a long period of time, and for some reason you don't want to dismount your camera and put it on an actual tripod type stable surface, you'll be able to pull it off, use it when you need to use it handheld, bring it back. The external battery can be changed to give you more runtime. And if for some reason you need it to run for 20 hours, you plug that battery into a power supply and you should have the most flexibility in powering.
Good, Sky.
Yeah, I was going to recommend the same as Bill. If there's a way to plug in a V-mount to the exterior, those V-mounts can go, tens of hours easily, especially with that small power drain.
I don't know where you'd put it. It's a pretty small little device, but I think that the only thing I don't quite understand is why you would take a handheld and try to power it forever. I mean, it's just, I think it's probably outside the general use case. So I think that would be, I guess if it's seated, it's one thing. And I don't know enough about it to do it. When I looked at it, I was like, I would have multiple batteries. It would take a second to drop one out and put the other one in. But I don't know. I'd be interested in what you're doing that you need it to be constantly. If it's sitting on a table or it's mounted somewhere and it just needs to always work, that'd be interesting. Next question.
James Hutchinson, Dublin, Ireland says, "Alex, what do you use your 8x8 HDMI Matrix for?"
It's usually just because I have a bunch of computers and a bunch of monitors, and I'm always trying to figure out how to look at everything. So, for instance, I might have something I want to show you, but I also want to be able to see it on a full screen over somewhere else. And so I'll split that out, mirror that so that it's going into the switcher, and then it's also going into the matrix. And then that way I can kind of have full screen versions of things that I'm showing. And so that's usually how I'm using that there. Next question.
Mitchell Hill, Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel. What kind of case do you recommend for your iPhone and why?
Mitchell.
We started talking about this before broadcast today, and I don't do anything. I kind of like how sleek the iPhone is. Sorry, this is the 6. And the only thing I might put on it is a Bodyguard's glass protector. It's sort of a aluminized glass that will keep impacts from starring or causing cracks in your monitor.
Go ahead, Serge.
Yes, I did the same thing this year. I don't put anything in the back, put a protecting glass on the front. I still think that's a great looking phone while catching it with a case on it. Last year I used the Apple leather case, was fine, but still a little bit bulky. I prefer the look of that, and still seems to be working fine for me.
So Hosmuk actually sent me a case that I took. I had a case that was working pretty well, and I took it off and tried it. I've become quite happy with it. This is a Peak design case, and what's cool is it's got a little wallet thing on the back. So this comes off. This is just magnet, and so I just snap it on if I want to do it that way. So I keep my credit cards in here, and I can pull it off. It does stay on it, but it also has this little mount, so I can mount it to a tripod, or I can mount it to the car or something else, and it actually snaps inside of it. So the magnet guides it, but then it's snapped, and then you have a little thing that you have to actually let go to pop it out. I think it's a pretty well designed little piece. I always put cases on them because I drop them, and it takes all the stress out of it. I also put a glass, some kind of glass on the front. So mine's
doesn't
kind of
the magnets mess up the credit cards in the back?
They haven't so far. They're all chips now. I mean, maybe it does to the other ones, but I haven't had any issue with it. And everybody's using chips, and I don't use. I admit that I haven't had any issue with it. I've had something that has magnets for a while, and haven't had any issue because we're not. I don't think almost nobody in the United States uses magnet strips anymore.
I don't think you can use the MagSafe charger with that, though.
I don't. I'm not a MagSafe person.
If you could attach your car keys, you'd have a single point of failure to ruin your whole life if you lost it.
So here's the funny thing is that I the reason I do it is because I kept on losing my phone or losing my wallet, but I found if I put both of them together, I've done this for the last 5 years. If both my wallet and my phone are in the same place, I never lose both of them ever. It's just like they're all. I always know where that is. So that's why I did it. Next question.
Next question comes from James Hutchinson, Dublin, Ireland. And James says, Alex, what's the placement of the two Pavotubes relative to your Brio?
So I have the Brios right on top of my computer in front of me like this. And then my Pavotubes are probably about 16 inches on either side. The bottom of them are lined up with the Brio itself. They're not quite as good as they were yesterday, I think. I had them on tripods and I had them up and a little higher and leaned down. But the way that the structure of this desk works doesn't work for that. So it's literally a fold out desk with it's just a place for me to just set them, on top of it. So it's one of those weird micro things. It's a weird micro hotel that I would not normally come back to, except for the fact, and this is a perfect example of what I was talking about yesterday. It has great bandwidth. So when I'm in LA, this is becoming my hotel because of the bandwidth, and the rest of the hotel I don't really particularly like. But it has great bandwidth, So, and I would say that my connection today, you guys can let me know, is much better than it was yesterday. I don't think I've had probably too many stalls.
No, there's one hit, but it's been 99%.
Yeah, and so so that's go ahead, Chris.
It's much better. Does it also include free color TV?
It has a color TV on. I guess it has a TV on the wall. I didn't know until you asked.
I love in the 50s you'd drive across country and it'd be a motel. It's like free color TV, and then in the 80s or 90s it was like free internet, and now they're going to start advertising.
I would
100 megs up and down.
Less. They should. Just guaranteed 10. I'd be happy. Guaranteed 10 on an Ethernet cable, and I would go there all the time. Like, I don't need them to give me 100 megs up and down. I just need a guaranteed, when I come in, there's an Ethernet cable, and I know that I'll get 10 up and down every single time I connect to it. And that would become the hotel that I went to all the time. And I would give up my TV in a heartbeat for an Ethernet cable, for this, especially in a hotel where the Wi-Fi is, you have people all around you. It's just a horrible idea. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, our friend, says, any tips on making NDI a, quote, better citizen?
To make it a better citizen, they'd have to get rid of what I think they think is important, which is everything just sees everything else all the time. It's that constant, basically multicasting that it's doing that is, it's a network nightmare, and so that's really fundamentally the issue is that the ease of use is why it's not good on the network, and it screws up. We've had other things where other things aren't working, and then we take the NDI devices off of it, and everything works again. So it's like, unless I can put it on its own, like literally, I don't want to. I've done some NDI stuff, but I won't let it. It has to have its own wired network. Like everything is its own, and then it just sits there. And you can do whatever it wants, but I will not put it. I will not do production with NDI running on the same wires as my full production. Yeah, go ahead, Serge.
Have you ever tried to have a separate VLAN for the NDI?
Yeah, we've had issues where we thought we had a separate VLAN, and then it was still doing stuff that was affecting us, and we don't even know how that would work. Like we were like, that shouldn't happen. And so it's so aggressive about connecting with other things that it just seems to be this virus, that is like just wants to get out all the time to, wants to talk to everybody that it needs to talk to, and we'll just ignore most of the rules that we have around it. Now, I know some people are Jeff Keithley and other people are really good at doing it, and they're very happy with it, and that's fine. It's just like, to me, it's it was written in a way that is really for it and not for everything else that's going on. And so I'm fine with it as long as I can put it on a completely separate network that doesn't interact with everything else I got to do. I'm fine with doing that. But like Dante, we put on a separate network, but we do it with VLAN, and that has worked fine. It's just that NDI is not.
Well, the VLAN is part of it. Depending of your networking, you need to make sure that the routing between the two VLAN is blocked if you don't want to have it going on.
Yeah, it just seemed like a lot of work. so I was like, I'd rather just stick with. I mean, and again, I will admit that we've had enough anomalies with NDI, and we've seen them here with audio and dropout packets and drop frames and all kinds of other stuff that it's just not good enough. It's not good enough stability and quality for me to go through the effort of trying to figure out how to make it work on the network. So that's been where I come from. I know that there's plenty of people here that are very successful with it. So I'm not saying that my version is the truth. That's how I've approached it so far. And I scale up to lots and lots of signals too. So one network running 80 video signals or 60 video signals is not something that is sustainable.
So is it the reason why you think, let's say, Teams SDI output will be a lot better than any NDI solution?
For me, the showstopper for Teams is 720p and 4 megs a second. Like until they fix that, there's not. I don't like. I have to.
Agree.
I don't. There's nothing there for me. like there's nothing. There's nothing at 720 and 4 megs a second. Like I want to be able to turn Zoom up to 10 megs a second. Like we can with Stream Voodoo. I don't. I'm not going backwards, and so I don't have any strong opinion about Teams because they're not meeting the minimum requirements to run a show from my perspective, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, would headphone monitoring via the Waves SoundGrid network using the DiGiGrid Q headphone amplifier or the DiGiGrid M interface have excessive latency versus the direct monitor feed from a digital console?
I don't think any of us know. You might have stumped us, Douglas. I don't think there's enough of us here using those devices. My guess will always be that the direct monitor will be lower latency, and any latency when you're listening through a headphone is problematic. So, next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas says, what old tech can you remember that you had before the age of 10?
Okay. We're over time, so it's just going to be everyone just spit them out, and we're not going to talk about them too much because we're out of time. Go ahead, Chris.
My parents had a TV with this little chime remote. You hit the button and it hits the chime. The problem was that the dog's choke collar, we use choke collars, sue me. When the dog would scratch, the TV channel would go chick, 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 chick.
There you go.
It was the same chime.
Allied Radio had a kit for an AM transmitter using a vacuum tube, and that was my introduction to broadcasting.
John.
Magnavox Odyssey played Pong on that in the 70s.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
General Electric reel-to-reel tape machine.
Sky.
A small radio walkie-talkie kit that was from I Spy, and it looked like a cigarette pack with a ballpoint pin on it. That's good for 8-year-olds.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
My sister won a record player with a copy of Sugar Shack on it, and it changed my life.
I think that right before I was 10 is when I got to start programming on a Trash 80, a Radio Shack TRS 80. So I think that it was either when I was 10 or right before I was 10 was when I started programming on that wonderful device. All right. We are now changing subjects, talking about story. Someone here loves to talk about story, so it was one of the suggestions for our second hour. And anyway, so I thought we'd throw it in here. And I think that so for the panelists, go ahead, and if you want to say something about it, go ahead and raise your digital hand in the back end. But I think that one of the things I wanted to talk about is the mechanics of story, and how we get to those places. And, we ended up with a lot of discussions about this, and some of it can be somewhat mechanical, like some of the things are very mechanical. Like, so, there's in many of the stories that we see, we have 3 acts, act 1, act 2, act 3. And it was funny. I was trying to figure out acts, and I was talking to someone. This was a person at Lucasfilm, and a long time ago. I'll leave one name, but I was talking to someone, and I said, I don't understand what we're supposed to do with those acts. I didn't know anything about story when I was working on Star Wars. I mean, I got hired because I knew how to build models, and they said, well, you just got to, Act 1 is describe the tree, Act 2 is get them up the tree, and Act 3 is get them down the tree. They can fall out of the tree, they can fly out of the tree, they can decide they're going to stay in the tree. But Act 3, generally, some version of it's going to get them out of it or have them decide that that's what it is. But those are the 3 acts, And then what was interesting about it is that they said, and then you just approximately 26 scenes. It's like 20, like it was just mathematical. There's like 26 scenes. You're going to break those up into 3 groups. And if you think of it, what was interesting about that was it made it easier for me to think about a story, of what are those scenes, what are those 26, scenes that I have to think out. And many movies don't follow that, like they go all over the place. And that's like the kind of the beginner's guide to, how you think about that process. But I think that it was really interesting when you think about it in a mechanical term of, when you're thinking about how do you churn one TV show after another, because that's what always amazed me about story was it's one thing to go shoot it. It's another thing to come up with the idea and package it and do that every week, is an insane thing, to put together. And so being able to think about these kind of structures that people are sitting inside of kind of makes a difference. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and as you said that, it did remind me, the most recent is that there are 3 different stories that you tell. There's the one you write, the one you shoot, and then the one you edit. And you have to be okay with each of those in the creative process. And that's oftentimes where you wreck your ship is that's nothing like what the book was like. Well, it's a different medium when you're making it into a movie. You've only got 90 minutes. And why do you have 90 minutes? Historically, that's as long as people would be able to sit comfortably and to have you tell them a journey, take them on a journey. But I've actually, I know you don't like me quoting, but I quote you a lot. When you told me that story about the squirrel, hungry squirrel, seeing a nut, climbs the tree, eats the nut. And it introduces the character, introduces the conflict, takes you on the journey, gets you to the resolution, and you're done. So it's the beginning, middle, and end of traditional storytelling. And as you say, I came to story late in life because I was making a perfectly good living pushing buttons for other people and making the machinery and the clickety clicks. But then once I spent my $100,000 on an Avid DS and it wasn't making me a living, I looked around and I thought, what is eternal about what I do? And it's like people sitting around a campfire since they began telling how the bear came in and then how the tribe said that person's really good at telling that story. And then that person represented the tribe's story. So I'm very excited about this conversation.
One of the things I thought was interesting that I noticed in watching movies, I have a tendency to get rid of the first act. Like after I've seen the movie, I'm like, oh, I don't need to watch the first part again.
Yeah, it's introduction.
It's the introduction. And what I notice is how often I end up between minute 40 and minute 48. So like there's in that's the moment where something happens that now you're in Act 2.
You're right. You're right on the edge of Act 2.
The whole thing builds up, and then it goes, and now we're gonna go into the shoot. And I'm just always amazed at how often that's the time. And when you're in those meetings, there are discussions about, hey, it's getting too late. We have to get to the second act. like we have to, like we're not, and yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was going to say, when I was studying story in my earliest days of thinking I was going to be in this industry, one of my professors reduced conflict. He says all story has conflict. Without that, you're just boring things. And he reduced it to 3 things. And I'm going to use old-fashioned terms because the way he said it, it was all man. And we understand that means mankind, and that means all genders and everything. But he says there's only 3 things you can break every story down: man versus man versus the environment, or man versus himself. At some point, everything in drama gets down to the essence of one of those 3 things. So I at least pay attention to which of those modes is my storytelling in, and I try to be I try to have one central focus of one of those three things, so I don't end up writing a first act that's one form of conflict and then confusing the audience by never resolving that conflict and going on. And I found that really useful to kind of keep me on track. What is my story's base conflict?
Right, go ahead, Chris.
I'm really interested in the concept of time when it comes to story. Alex, you mentioned the 48-minute thing. I know that when I watch a 1-hour TV drama, I find it kind of a curse that I know the end of the hour is coming. When I would watch TV live, you always know what time it is, that, whatever. When you watched it, I noticed when I started watching television shows on TiVo 20 years ago, because I didn't necessarily start it at the top of the hour, I was left in a little bit of a mystery. Like, how quick are they going to resolve this problem? And of course, there's the cliffhanger, which occasionally would happen in television shows, which would spoil everything. But I'd noticed that as you're absorbing the show, knowing how much time they have to resolve it can kind of spoil it. I also noticed about 15 years ago in network television that a lot of shows had goosed up their story pacing to the point where they felt it was resolving at approximately 47 minutes into the hour. It's like, oh, is this show? And they were using the last several minutes as the lead in to the next episode, like, oh, we're done. Oh, no, we're not, And I noticed multiple shows were doing that. I can't possibly remember them now, but time, to me, is a real big issue. And it's not just the clock time, but just the space between words can change the story.
Richard?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everyone's been mentioning so far. For me, story comes out of one specific place, which is the conflict between the desire and an obstacle to get that desire. It's really as simple as that. Whether you set your desire as I want to have a cupcake at my end of my day, and what's going to stop me getting that, or a larger desire, which is in 5 year time, I want to be X, and what's going to stop me getting to there. So the 3-act structure for cinema, which is really very formulaic and very simple, which, to use Alex's analogy, you introduce a squirrel, then the squirrel goes on their journey. The squirrel has to at some point have a midpoint climax, which is something that's going to obstruct them on that journey. And then as they've gone up the tree, they have to have a problem which sends them back to the beginning, which essentially restarts their journey, which moves into Act 3. So the 3-act structure, once you understand it for cinema, you see it all the time, every single time. There'll be a problem in the middle of the film, and then just before the end, the character will be sent back to the beginning of their journey and then almost restart it, depending upon what is their need or their desire and what is the obstacle for them to get to it. So story tends to come down to that really simple system, at least in cinema it does. In theater and other formats, it becomes a lot more complex because you have more time and you can do more things.
Good, Sky.
Well, and that we're talking about math, and music, again, of course, is math, quarter note, eighth note, whole notes, and that the structure of telling a story can be very formulaic. And also the style was dependent upon the technology. And so we remember back in the 60s when you would see the person driving, you would see the person grab the handle of the car, you would see the person walking up. Well, now the editorial style is, hey, I need to take a drive. He reaches for the door handle, and the next thing he's in wherever he was driving to. And so there's, again, the styling, also the technology, that we're not paying the film rates that we used to. We're not paying the amount of crew that it would take to capture this. So don't be confused by the stylings of the eras for the technologies. So there's the math of the thing.
As we look at the technology, because I think that in big films, the cost of every shot is, unless it's a big visual effect shot, the cost of every shot's, not the biggest cost in the film. so like the inserts and the other things like that.
No, the compositing of something.
It's just that you just realize that there's so many, like the cost of film is a big deal to us. To a production, it's it was nothing. What's interesting that I'm watching is this as streaming takes off, the arcs are getting much larger. And, so for instance, you look at now, these story arcs are now 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 80 hours. Like if you look at Game of Thrones, their story arc was a little too long for them. They ran out of arc. But they could have, there was an arc there that they just, because the writer hadn't written. This is a good example of story.
Yeah.
Is that you had someone who thought about this for the first 4 seasons. If we look at Game of Thrones, you have someone who thought deeply about it for the first 4 seasons, and then the showrunners took it over on season 5, and then the showrunners didn't want to do another season because they had other opportunities. And I think that basically, they just ran out of room. They didn't know how to keep these characters running, and that's the thing that how story can get so complex is that I think they just gave up. On the last season, that they were like, we don't know how to do this. We want to get out of it. Let's just close it.
Well, and many contracts are based on 7 years, 7 seasons.
Well, but I'm saying that this was an issue that HBO would have let them continue to go on forever. This was a huge cash cow for them.
Oh, yeah.
So the big problem was that I think that they just couldn't manage the show. There were so many storylines that unless they were R.R. Martin, they were not able to. They didn't understand the characters well enough, and you could see that they didn't understand the characters by the last minutes. Here's what I thought was interesting: is in the last couple minutes of every Game of Thrones, there'd be this thing with the showrunners, and they would talk about the film, or they would talk about what they were thinking, and you could tell that they were interacting with those characters transactionally. Like they were just thinking of it as a show. Like to them, it was just another show. To R.R. Martin, those were people. Like those were people that he was working through. And it was really interesting is how how they looked at them, because they were looking for devices and process. And this is what we're going to tell you. And this is exactly what we were talking about before. There's like mechanics of how to do this.
Yep.
R.R. Martin was telling the story of people's lives.
The ethos of the
he was
concept.
Like, and he was kind of working through that, and they were not. And what we saw was this huge buildup for the first 4 seasons, and then the 5th season was a little rocky, and then it just started dropping off the,
Well, and you'll hear the phrase "jump the shark" too, because they're trying to make something go longer than it should.
Well,
and I also want to point out,
their problem was they were trying to go shorter than something that it should. It needed another 2 or 3 seasons.
Well, and Richard also brought up a very critical thing. The squirrel in the beginning of this analogy is the character, and if you have more than one character, that's an ensemble cast. That's a Friends concept, and you can make things go longer and longer. But we as humans want to follow a single story at a time, and if you get too many people, it could be very challenging for us as an audience.
That said, the most successful. Do you know what the most successful TV series is?
Seinfeld.
Law and Order. Like they made did money because
the dirty secret to that is it's a how done it, not a who done it, and that's a puzzle. And so look who their audience is, and they're satisfying the paternal need or the maternal need of people. I'm sorry, I have an opinion.
I will argue that the reason that as soon as we see a TV show become soapy. That's what we call it. It gets soapy. They start creating these big arcs, these large arcs. I don't need the arcs. Like we watched Person of Interest for the last little bit of time, which we really enjoyed.
Sure.
Until the big arc started taking over, and then we're like, okay, we're done.
Yep.
Like I was fine with there was a problem and it ended every hour was like the perfect thing for us, and I didn't need anything else. Anyway, Stefan.
Yeah, there's a guy named Joseph Campbell, and he wrote a book. This is called Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically the groundwork for all the big stories or all the big arches you mentioned. And they say even George Lucas was one of his, his clients when he wrote the concept of the big story.
Yeah.
So, and this is a 16 or 17 step process, which is more or less in the core of every big story.
Yeah.
And it's too much to mention them all right now, but if anyone is interested in that, it's a real treasure. What you'll find there.
I'd also throw the word Robert McKee into that mix.
Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
His Power of Myth also is well worth reading. I'm interested in another piece of this, which is how much you pay attention to what the audience wants as opposed to what you want to give them. And the reason that I'm interested in that, one of my favorite novels of all time, a guy named William Gibson, one of the great authors of science, fantasy, and things like that. His favorite book for me is a book called Pattern Recognition, and I recognize that it is not a favorite of everybody, even his favorite book for everybody who loves him as an author. But what attached to me was that it was speaking in the language that I, as a video producer and a writer, understands really well. And he set up this conflict over the first 2/3 of the book. And I remember when I got about to that level and reading it, I started getting really depressed because I thought, my God, this man has written himself into a corner. There's no way he can resolve a central conflict about how anything in the first 2/3 of this book could actually be resolved in a way that would be satisfying to me, who understands the industry that he's talking about. I'm engaged and I'm going to be disappointed. It's going to be terrible. When he got to the end and he resolved that central conflict in a successful way, I thought, my God, that is brilliant writing. And so the reason I'm even talking about this is because what about your audience do you know about, and what tools can you give them to engage them? Because somebody reading a sports novel or watching a sports movie is going to have a different set of sensitivities than somebody watching or seeing a ballet movie. They're going to have similarities, and there are things, but they won't know the contexts of the difficulties of hitting a fastball versus a perfect run of releve or whatever.
And I think that one of the things that's really interesting is when you can do all the things really well and you tell the story and you build it up. Even people who cross over, like I will admit that I'm probably not the most, I watch a lot of Jason Bourne, those are the kind of shows I watch. Those are the kind of movies I watch mostly. But I have now watched Delicious. It is a French film with subtitles about cooking that I've now watched 3 times in the last 3 weeks, and I just keep on it has none of the things that I normally watch in a movie. And it's just such a great story and a great, well shot, well designed. So at first I literally turned it on because I saw the trailer and it looked so beautiful in HDR that I was like, I was like, oh, I have to watch this, and then the music design is the sound design is really good in Atmos. And then, but the story is great and it just really builds out. And it's a very, gentle story as opposed to other things that I have a tendency to watch. And, but when that story is really compelling, I think that it can kind of get over top of all our pre-built ways of doing things. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I think if there's enough of ours reading this, The Hero with a Thousand Faces is definitely on it, along with Ways of Seeing and, from my perspective, The Empty Space by Peter Brook, because these are the 3 books that kind of really helped me understand both how to build story and build story in a space as well. Because it's worth understanding that, as much as we've mentioned the cinematic formula, that every genre demands its own style of structure for a story. And what we're now talking about, and as Alex mentions with streaming, that structure is now changing into much larger arcs. And the arcs, often even now in streaming, the first 2 episodes you could throw out because most first acts are boring and can be thrown out. I used to teach new writing for theatre, and you would normally get a script submitted that you could just dispense with the first third because you want to get into the action as quickly as possible. And as we move into streaming, and in particular for our own live events that are streaming, it's going to demand a completely new type of structure as we evolve into this form. So what the pandemic has given us is now a lot more theatrical and other live artists who are engaging with a live video platform and system than ever before. And that's going to start to change what story is and how story is told in a really interesting way, where you have artists who are in Donegal in Ireland contacting and working with other artists in Canada and beyond, creating new stories that are together. And it's going to be a really fascinating time.
What I think is interesting, before we get into the questions, is also that stories can be really short. Like if you look at TikTok or Vine, my kids love Vine. And they still watch Vine, even though it's not there anymore because they watch it on YouTube. But those are 7-second stories. And TikTok largely was 15-second stories and maybe a minute. And it's what was interesting is how you can construct an entire story. I mean, I think that for me, the Pixar, the Pixar just flexes every once in a while. And I think that the first 10 minutes of Up is flexing. I will give you no dialogue, show you a bunch of visuals, and you'll be crying in 10 minutes. like it's just, I'm going to tell you that story and I'm just going to just grab onto you. And that takes, and like Pixar are the masters of kind of putting that together and really thinking through those processes. But, like the shortest story, this is I don't know if it's urban legend or true, but someone asked Ernest Hemingway one time could you write a story in 6 words? And he said, "For sale, baby shoes never worn." Just 6 words, and it's just amazing, so he just condensed that whole thing, down into it. So it's I also don't think we need to think about it as it has to be 8 hours or 10 hours or 1 hour. It can be done with, it's just a matter of, does it have all the components that you need to make that work? I also think that the last thing before we do it is that we need to think about stories not in one. I think we're still caught in this idea that it's just a TikTok story, or it's just a movie story, or it's just a TV story, or whatever it is. What we haven't really seen the industry do yet is started creating the story across all the platforms at the same time. I think that we should have, for a lot of these stories, have things that if you only watch Disney Plus, The Mandalorian, you'll totally enjoy it. And if you didn't know that the other platforms were there, it wouldn't matter. But if you watch the YouTube or the TikTok or the Instagram or whatever, there's all these little sub-stories that are going on all around the main story that would enrich your experience of that main story, that it would make it even better. And I think that that's something that we haven't seen people, really take on, and I think it's partially because of tradition, that Hollywood doesn't really understand social media yet. So they'll get there. All right, let's go to the next question.
Next question comes to us from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. He says, stories aren't inherently good. They are inherently powerful. Junk food companies use stories to sell diabetes. How do we prevent our stories from becoming weapons used for manipulation?
Go ahead, Richard.
It's a really difficult question, but I think the fundamental truth is that everything is now story. Literally everything that we engage with on every platform and every type of medium, from journalism to cinema, is story now. It's story told from a perspective or with a perspective, and designed to attract and keep our attention for as long as possible. So it's really hard to escape from that type of truth, and even harder as a creator to create something without it possibly being taken in and changed or manipulated. So it's worth understanding that there's no escape from it, but also there's a total freedom in how you now create story and where you go with it, because there's so many more platforms and opportunities for us to create and to turn, as Alex said, TikTok and Vimeo and YouTube are just all platforms where we can put our stories and tell our perspective, because there's never before in human history has been the chance for an individual's perspective to be given such weight and such following than right now, because we have those platforms and tools. So we should respect the fact that I can put up a TikTok and become a global sensation, as obviously it will happen tomorrow. And I can have a reach and have a reach that never before one individual should or could have, and just respect it when you make your story, and be careful about what you're telling and who you're telling it to.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
There's been many times in my career where I've been asked to work for companies that I fundamentally disagreed with, and there's been times when I've just said no. I used to work for a guy, though. He goes, no, you want to get even with them, take as much of their money as possible. He just wanted the money, but it's a tough decision. But I think the easiest thing to do is to have your work, to prevent your work from, doing something bad, is be careful who you work for.
Yeah. Sky.
There are 2 people standing at a doorway. Person B opens the door. Person A says, you don't have to open the door because of my gender. Person B says, I'm not. I'm opening it because you needed the door open, and that was my job.
Bill, are you saying?
So I guess the punchline for John is it's kind of in your hands, and to open that door is your job. So
go ahead, Bill.
Largely what Chris says, I think you can be ashamed of the fact that you said no to somebody, or you can be proud of the fact that you said no to somebody. You'll learn as you go along to see more and more of the signals of the people that you should say no to. Some of my proudest moments are when I said no to, a spot that somebody asked me to do because I just knew it was a pyramid scam and I wasn't going to do the world any good by promoting that.
Yeah, I when it comes back to story, I will admit as a viewer, and I admit I'm very conscious to the algorithms that I'm interacting with all the time. As a viewer, if I think something is not a healthy, like a really not a healthy story to be telling, I will not watch it. Like I won't open it up or even test it because I know that that's a vote for that's something that should happen. I don't expect everybody to do that, but I'm just like, I'm not voting on that there. And I think more about it because of TikTok, because on TikTok, as soon as I see something, I go, nope, I don't want that because I don't want it in my feed. So I've gotten I realized that TikTok has made me very, very quick to go. I don't want to see more of that. So as a result, I'll just immediately bail out, in seconds.
Same for me. And that's something I'm trying to teach to my kids. They cannot unseen something, but they can stop watching something on YouTube, TikTok, or any platform. If I try to explain to them, if it's not something you see good, stop watching it. Turn off the iPad. Watch away. Anything. Yeah. Let's stop.
Yeah, my wife has made me very conscious to what she calls the mind's eye, and like what goes into it and what she's willing to allow into it is something that is I didn't think about before. Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, Story 101, have you ever witnessed projects that have put flashy technology over content to the detriment of the project as a whole?
We call that Tuesday. Sorry. Anyway, go ahead, John.
Every early student project, when we're teaching technology, we want to teach them all the different things that the tools can do. But as they progress, we want them to create projects. And I have to convince students that in your project, you don't have to show me everything that we taught you. You have to show us that you know how to select which ones will get your message. And that takes a long time to get them from wanting to throw every piece of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks to actually using the tool that is most effective for the story. And I got to the point, some points I said, I want to know what you thought about and threw away rather than what you put into the project.
Yeah. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I think we all get very attracted to the technology and how to use it, and we want to, as John says, throw it at the wall. A really nice example from live production now more often is just when to use a super source. Because I find that people, when they're first introduced to using super sources, they want to use it all the time. And it annoys me a lot, especially in our own productions, whenever we have cutters just go to super source just for the sake of going to a super source. Instead of deciding, well, what is this super source telling us about the story? Why am I going to multi-angles right now? What am I adding to the story of this overall production or this specific moment? So be selective and be discerning.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and a director actually told me that the Marvel movies just keep throwing more fireworks at the show, thinking that's going to move the story forward. And even fireworks get boring. You need the rise and fall. You want to follow a person's journey. And so it's not necessarily about how much fireworks you throw at the screen, or in this case, the lens, or even the edits. And again, the why. Why do certain cooking shows edit every 3 seconds? Is it because it's interesting? No, it's because they're in the highest channel on the cable that you're going to be flicking past, and they're trying to grab your attention to keep you in the show so they can sell you more advertising. So just beware.
Go ahead, Chris. Oh, we lost Chris.
No, I'm here. I'm sorry. I was just double checking. I didn't want to have my lips moving if my mic wasn't open. So I totally agree, Sky. It's all about the why. I ask people that all the time when they start asking me to put things into an edit that I feel are superfluous. And Richard, to your point about the super sources, as long as we're putting them in, we may as well animate them every time they come and go, right? It's like sometimes you have to ask that. Why? What does that benefit moving this conversation, which is a free-form story? How is that moving it forward? And the bottom line is, and I've told people this, I don't think I've ever said it here, cutting a live show is easy. Just make sure there's moving lips in every shot. Done.
Well, and the thing is that a lot of times we get this all the time where people want to show off something or be really flashy or throw something in that's whatever. And I'm always like, okay, on one side, I don't want to add extra things. On the other side is when you're talking about something, I don't want to watch you talk about it. I want to see an example. I want to see a video that illustrates what you're saying so that I can use both parts of my brain. If I'm just listening to you, why are we watching this? And so I think that I do want to see you talk about it, and I do want to come back to you constantly to know that there's a person there. But at the same time, I want to be able to have things appear and show why it works and help me visualize what that looks like. So I think that the technology's there you want to use that technology to illustrate those things and take people player. And again, I think that when it comes to telling a story about something factual, the gold standard 40 years later or 50 years later or whatever is still 45 years later is still connections. If you want to see someone tell a story about historical information and make it compelling, my kids, when we started watching the first time, they were 10 and 12 years old. You couldn't talk in the same room. They're 10 and 12 years old with a 40-year-old video that's highly compressed off of Internet Archive. And they're sitting there like, you can't, like, I'm watching this, you can't say anything. 2 years, now I just talked to my daughter about it. I was like, should we watch Connections again? She's like, oh yeah, we should watch Connections again. Like, she's just ready to dive into that. And so that is masterful storytelling. It is. And I think that we're going to I'm working on trying to get him on, but it is incredible of understanding what's important. I think that's one thing about storytelling that what is important in the story and how do we get it out there and how do we throw away, that's editing, to Chris's point, is you cut out all the stuff that isn't important to the story.
Yeah, brevity is the soul of wit. And then there is also a time to show and there is a time to tell. And that's I don't know how to do that without experience. And Chris, can you show versus tell?
I can't remember what I said, and I apologize.
Well, it's just the concept of we throw a lot of graphics up there, but maybe it's the showing the graphics in action, showing the cause and effect of the graphics.
What I had said was tops and tails. Alex was talking about editing, and I do that all the time when I listen to people. Don't need that. Oh, this part's interesting. Okay, you should be done now. And it's really frustrating when you're listening to people talk too long sometimes.
Next question.
Ray Harwood in Avondale, Arizona says stories can be told in a number of styles, and the best style is probably most dependent on the storyteller. How would you determine whether your subject's story would work best as interview style versus first-person narrative or another style?
Go ahead, Bill.
My answer to this is a little complex, and I'll do it real quick, but you can't really tell in advance, and you can't tell until you've been doing this long enough to have some experience with creating the different styles. And what I mean by that is that as a story creator, you are going to start, you're going to develop your own style, and you're going to look to it. In my case, I wrote magazine articles for a while, and I always was able to write my own scripts. And then I'm also a narrator, so I could always narrate it. And what I found myself doing was solving any story problems by writing some narration and getting the audience to the place that I needed them to go. It was the tool I had. I kept using it and using it. And it was only on one pro bono job I was doing for a wildlife rescue operation that I did a whole series of interviews. And as I was logging the interviews, it suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks that I needed nothing more than that to tell the story. And so I did my first video with zero narration from me and zero writing. And it was an epiphany. And from that point on, I had another tool. I don't have to write the story. So for me, if you want to check out those styles, you have to do those styles, build some chops, see if you can tell it in a reverse order or something else. But until you do it, you don't know you have the tool in your quiver to pull it off. So it requires more work well worth doing if you want to expand your abilities.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Speaking of broken records, who's your audience and what do you want them to do? And again, styles are like bell bottoms. They may come back in fashion. They may come, every 20 years, but styles will change. So understand what is it that you want your audience to do, and again, don't force your talent to be something they're not. And consequently, don't force them into a style, or bell bottoms in that metaphor, that isn't going to help them get their communications into that. Keeping your audience in mind first, because they're who you're there for. All the rest is irrelevant.
Richard?
Yeah, I would agree with Sky. That's what I was going to say is it's about a conversation between what is the talent and subject, and then who are the audience. So making sure that you're choosing the right format to get the message across from the talent to the audience, and choosing what is going to be the right format for that piece of talent. Don't put someone who's going to be worried about being on a live stage with a 500-person audience. Make sure you film something more intimate. So that's a conversation.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
It's very possible that the target you're trying to hit is larger than you think. It may work fine in either ways and in either direction. One of the things that I really appreciate is there's a trend where people are starting to create artificial limitations when they interview somebody. For example, I think it's Vogue, I believe, that does a thing where they show up at your door and they go, like 15 questions in 15 minutes or something like that. And they say, we're going to ask you just these questions and then we're done. Of course, it's completely staged, but it feels like this artificial limitations. I think at the Olympics, they're doing a thing. It's kind of cute, actually. They do 32 questions in 32 degrees, and they have an ice box. And they take the Olympians into this freezer that has a bunch of windows so the camera crew can be outside, and they interview them in a room that's 32 degrees. It's kind of fun.
I may have talked to somebody that was competing a couple years ago, and they just hate it. They hate everything about what NBC does. like the Olympians they say, well, it pays for us to do it, but it is an incredible amount of hate that they have for what NBC's doing with their stories and everything else, and it puts so much more pressure on them, and they just want to compete. It's a really interesting. Maybe it's just that person, but I talked to someone who was in an Olympics, and they were just like, they said they just hated it. Like they just hate dealing with them. All of them hate it. So it's something they have to put up with. Next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle says, for storytelling, Masterclass has some great people. Who would you listen to first?
David Mamet. So David Mamet did one early on. I love David Mamet films. Like The Heist is like one of my favorite films. I just love he's such a lyricist when it comes to dialogue that I love listening to it. And then Ron Howard has a great one that's on Masterclass. And there is Aaron Sorkin has a good one that's really good. And it's hard to listen to Aaron Sorkin talk after you've seen Sorkinisms on YouTube, but I try to get over it. It's just ruined my whole experience of Aaron Sorkin. It's just realizing that he's like regurgitating things over and over. He has a way he likes to say things, and he says them over and over and over again in different shows. Go ahead, Sky.
Yeah, and that he's found his formula in his style, just like any artist, and he continues to repeat it. And he's also unfortunately held to it. So yes, the Aaron Sorkin and second up on the Ron Howard. I listened to the Steve Martin. Unfortunately it was a 30-minute content in a 45-minute experience. It was like, but it was still valuable. But the Werner Herzog, I wanted to like it. I'm glad I had the experience of sitting with Werner Herzog, but boy, he's got some opinions about how to do things.
Yeah. Bill?
We naturally all do that. We go to people who talk about the things that most resonate with us. But I'm going to suggest that try something different. I watched one of the master classes with Frank Gehry, the architect, and I came away with that with a tremendous amount of information and new perspectives. Sometimes in my life, going to things that are completely outside my expertise or my zone are where I get truly fresh new ideas, because I'm not hearing things I already have an opinion about.
I mean, I'd watch a lot more masterclass if I could figure out how to get it to work on my Apple TV. I watch little bits of them because I still can't get it to register correctly. Masterclass is the reason that I'm so upset about the idea of breaking up the App Store, is because I feel like it'll all be Apple TV. And I stopped buying apps on the Apple TV because of all the weird registration stuff that they did, rather than just have it work, And so I think that's their number one downfall, is that, and their live executions are an embarrassment. But anyway, next question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington. Casey Neistat now has a class on storytelling. What is his value to us teaching from his generation's style of storytelling?
Go ahead, Chris.
I think Casey's a master storyteller. I'm a huge fan. I discovered his, and I always say this because I'm way too old to be saying the word vlog because I feel like an idiot when I say it, but I discovered his vlog about 30 days into his, I think it ended up being 850 daily vlogs in a row, never missing a day. I think he can tell a story about something that's not really story worthy and make it interesting. He shoots quite well, and there's not a single one of his 800 plus vlogs, again that word, that he posted that I would not be proud to put my name on as an editor. He's a great storyteller.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another good example is like This American Life. You know, when you talk about taking something, I've gotten to a point now where I go, I know I like it, even though the title and the subject matter looks boring. I'm still gonna listen because I know that they're gonna craft something that I want to listen to, and their ability to kind of build up that story. The one that I go back to, because I just find it amazing that we don't know about it, is that if you do a search for This American Life for Minnesota Massacre, and it is about the interaction between the Dakotas and the settlers, and there's no clear good person or bad, you know, like they've really made it gray and complicated, and you know, and I think that that's the interesting thing is that it's not saying it's all one way or the other. It's just showing how messy it was, you know, and how complicated, and in an incredibly, just an incredible story of what happened. A horrible story, but an incredible one. Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Well, and that's again the confusion of what we're watching. Often, is, even though it says news, it's actually opinion, and that the bias is going to be within. And this is why Chris and I really have an affinity, is because we understand at some point we have to make a choice. And that we're going to have to, we're constrained by time or space, and consequently we have to make a choice, and that bias is very difficult. So I applaud that storytelling, that you can just present it in such a way that it's up to the audience to perceive not who the hero or the villain is, but the conflict.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I want to see that story.
Can't hear you, Chris.
And back to your statement, Sky, I think that Casey, it took me a while. I'm naive. I realized how much older than Casey I am, and I think it helps old people like myself to listen to the younger generation. It keeps you more firmly planted in what is relevant to those that are quite a bit younger than me.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael, California. In the media industry, how are stories and script filtered and selected with respect to the return on investments for the stakeholders?
Go ahead, Chris.
I think primarily they keep repeating things that work. They're not, in most broadcast television, they're just going to keep regurgitating the same things over and over. Same thing with movies. That's why we have so many sequels to, you know, one comic book movie after another. And, you know, if you lay them on top of each other, I bet you all the story beats are in exactly the same place. They're going to regurgitate because they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars on in some instances. They want to make sure they get the money back. It worked last time. Just do what he did. I don't want your new fancy ideas, kid. Just do the same thing again, because it makes money.
Go ahead, Sky.
I have a history book on the Paramount Theater or Paramount Studios, and that was every 3 years they would just put a new ingenue in the female role, a new hero in the male role, and that's again the ROI of the entertainment business, and that's what they're looking for is bottoms in seats.
And in fairness,
is the phrase, or eyeballs.
In fairness, those safe investments are what pay for all these little independent films and all these other things. Sure. I once was talking to Mike Edwards, who's the lead singer for a band back in the day called Jesus Jones, and on his label was Vanilla Ice. And it was one of the things we were backstage. I said, "So what do you think of Vanilla Ice?" Because he's on the same label, and he goes, "Oh, I love Vanilla Ice." He goes, "Because I wouldn't, if Jesus Jones wouldn't be anywhere without Vanilla Ice. We wouldn't have gotten the money to record the album. We're a huge risk, like everything else. And so all those safe sequels that generate profit allow the movie industry to experiment with the crazy ones that don't look like they're going to make any money, that turn out, that's where they're making their high return, tests, to make that work. Unless the director gets to a point where they have enough juice where they get to just do whatever they want to do, like a Christopher Nolan, or, like he gets to just make the movie he wants to make, because there's no editorial control, over what he does.
And again, I wasn't poo-pooing repetitive, because I like the same consistency as I go to Starbucks. I want the same cup of coffee wherever I am in the world. And so I'm not against a process or a system. I'm just saying, again, I'll play my one quote card of the day, and it's your quote. It's your quote. It's if you're one step ahead, you're avant-garde. If you're two steps ahead, you're a martyr. And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a version of that quote. Go ahead, Bill.
I also don't think people understand the tsunami, the gigantic tsunami of scripts that roll through the system. I mean, we're all sitting there watching things, and you think, I could write an episode of Miami Vice or something like that. It'd be great. The chances of you getting into that system of a popular TV show or a popular movie system is so remote, only because I had a friend once who had to send back scripts, and he had rooms full of scripts. I mean, literally rooms. The tsunami that's coming in all the time is insane. And it's at the point also you have the copyright issues on top of that. Often any legitimate studio will not accept a script from somebody if it doesn't come through a literary agent of some stature in the industry, because they need pre-filters on top of pre-filters to get rid of the mountains of incompetently created scripts to get down to the few that have that. And usually those come from people who are inside the industry and have learned to make them good.
And usually the problem is they don't even want to look at your script unless you're coming from somebody, because they don't want you suing them saying you did. They don't want to see your story. That's the hardest part, is because they're afraid you're going to sue them, like you saw their story and then you copied it, and then and so so a lot of folks, unless you're coming from an agent or unless you're coming from an inside thing and they know that you're safe, they won't even read it. And so that's the other thing. And then you have ones that bounce around for a long time. The Seven, the movie Seven, I think we've talked about in the past, bounced around Hollywood for, I think, a couple of years of people just trying to, look at it. And it just got to be known as the head in the box. Like that was like, oh, you're looking at the head in the box. Like the executives would be like, oh, I looked at the head in the box thing. I wonder about that. It was just known as the head in the box, and which is funny because you have this whole movie that has all these other storylines, but everybody knew it as that. That's all it was called until it came out the other end, and that became hard for it to get over. Of getting someone to sign up for it. Next question.
Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland is up next. He says, I'm having difficulty understanding structure of episodic shows. Are there 3 or 5 acts every episode, or across multiple shows, or even the season?
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, it's probably worth thinking about this in terms of arcs, not necessarily the 3-act or 5-act structure. And an episodic show of TV is full of multiple arcs. The arc for that episode, the season arc, the arc for each individual character, and each of those arcs might be split up into different acts in and of themselves as they move through the season. So a season arc might start as one scene mentioned at the beginning, in the first episode of a season, that will then become multiple scenes in a later episode of the season as it starts to resolve. So think of it in terms of the arcs and how many arcs are going to be in an episode.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it can definitely be both, Roy. A really great example of this is the show The Wire. The Wire, I believe, was 5 seasons, and each season had a theme. And like one was like, and it was always the same story, good cops in a bad system. Or sometimes bad cops in an okay system, but like there was a whole season about the education problem. There's a whole season about shipping, and there's a whole, and so a story can develop between commercial breaks. It can develop across a 1 hour, 43-minute show, or it can develop across multiple episodes, which I think sometimes I wonder if these are not writers and or directors that are really hungry to do a feature length thing, and they kind of prove it over like 3 episodes. See, look, I could do this. Let me have a movie. And let me stop directing, episodes of Friends or whatever.
Although what's interesting now is I think that more and more, there's a whole bunch of folks that really want to do it for streaming services because they get to just they don't have to live up to, you know, all the requirements that they had to do. They don't have to figure out where the commercial breaks are. They don't have to stop at a certain time. They can be 53 minutes or 67 minutes or 23 minutes, whatever makes sense, you know, for that episode. And so, you know, I think that there's a longer and longer draw. And I think many people in the industry are realizing that that's going to be a huge part of the industry, is building these longer episodic, you know, longer things that are kind of, you know, broken up, you know, across all of those things. Yeah,
I remember when Jack Bauer 24 came to a close after, I believe it was 7 or 8 seasons. There was talk about, oh, are they going to make a 24 movie? I was like, why? You're going to spend 3 times as much on a 2-hour movie. Just give me another season and give me another 24 episodes of Jack Bauer. I'd much rather watch a season than a movie.
Yeah. You were going to say something, John Ittelson? Did you flick something there? Yeah. One of the things I thought was really brave was like Penny Dreadful, which I enjoyed a lot. It was 3 seasons. They designed it as 3 seasons. They did 3 seasons, and when they finished, it was done. Like there was not like it, and they closed it up. Like there's not going to be a 4th season. And I think that it's really hard for you know, broadcast or anybody, because they don't want to give up an IP that they already spent all that money developing. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville, Tennessee says, thoughts on storytelling for persuasion or to get a point across.
Go ahead, John.
For me, my teaching evaluations improved when I was doing curriculum development and designing a course and said, here's the content, here's what the objectives are, so this is what I need to teach. And in my early teaching, then I just pour that into a course. I stopped for a moment and said, okay, this is what needs to get across. Let me make some stories about it. And that improved my lecturing, it improved my course design. And it was really surprising to me is later on in advanced courses, students would refer to the stories around some of the concepts that we were teaching rather than the actual concept. So storytelling is a good way of persuasion in academic settings.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
As the consumer, decide what is it that you are trying to appreciate out of this time that you're giving. In other words, who's funding this project? What is their agenda? And look up the word propaganda. It's not necessarily a bad word. It's a bias that we talked about. It's an opinion, but it's something that's going to influence the story that you're consuming. Now, what are you a part of that agenda that person wants, or you want to be just entertained?
And go ahead, Bill.
And empathy on the part of your audience. And I hate to say it, but it's become really a game. I once read something where a producer of content was saying, I'm only looking for one reaction. And that is whoever is watching this to go, yeah, that's right. I don't care about anything else. As long as I can get them going, yeah, that's right. If I can fake a thing that aggrieves them and then present them with a solution and make them go, yeah, that's right, I've got a bond. And at that point, I can do anything I want with them. So it's weird to see them take this idea of empathy, which is a very natural thing, and turn it into just a commercial hook.
I think that the thing is that I often think of like persuasion in those areas is it's what we're doing with stories. We're illustrating the point that you want to make. We're illustrating it. Now, as soon as we flip over to telling you, you know, like, so, and that happens in dialogue a lot. Like someone obviously has an opinion about something and they want to tell it. And so they use it as some person telling the dialogue. And I feel like that's telling again, not showing, you know, and now you're, and the danger is someone like me will see right through that and go, oh, okay, I get it. Like I get what they're trying to do with this movie. And as soon as I see that, then I'm like usually done. Like, you know, like I'm just, you know, and I think that in the end, the story has to be the pinnacle of things. And if you can illustrate something, you know, and I love things that are illustrating things that you don't understand. Like I thought that Traffic is a great example of a film that just shows the complexity of how all of these things work. And it, you know, I don't know what, I mean, there's some persuasion probably the legalization of drugs maybe, but you know, but but just showing how all of these things are complex and nothing is simple and nothing is, and I think the persuasion was, and that Babel is another good one, another good example of something that just shows, I love movies and I love stories that show you how complicated the world is, because it is complicated. Like anybody who tells you anything is simple doesn't understand it. Like as soon as they say, oh, that's simple, this is just the way to do that, I'm like, okay, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Like I can just say that flat out. Like, you know, if someone says it's simple and this is just how it works, then I know that you don't understand what it is. And and when I think something simple, then I know that I probably don't know it as well. So I love movies that pull out the complexity of it, and then inside of that, you can come up with your own conclusions. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. Up next, he says, what about Freytag's pyramid? Exposition, inciting incident, rising actions, climax, falling action, resolution, and denouement. Denouement equals the strands of the plot are drawn together and matters are explained or resolved.
Go ahead, John.
You know, my brain thinks mathematically, and you said it earlier, Alex. You said arc, and so I was watching an episodic TV show the other day, and it climaxed like 3/4 away into the show. And then the turn down, or whatever you call the backside of his story, was like 15 minutes long. And I think of it like it's more like a polynomial, not an arc, but it's like, how do you place the ease in and ease out of the stories dynamically to tell that tell that story?
Like Return of the King, it was like an hour. There was like an hour at the end, like of stuff that you felt like you had to put in for the folks who read it and would be upset if you don't include it. But it was like, we're done. They won. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, that's actually quite a good example of how, you know, the structure can change to suit the story, but it feels wrong. You know, if you keep adding these things in, it feels often wrong. So Freytag's pyramid is a 19th century playwright structure. So it's a little bit, it's certainly evolved since then, and it's designed for theater because the climax comes just before, at the end of Act 2. Whereas in cinematic structure, the climax comes at multiple points, including in the midpoint and then towards the end of Act 2 and then further on. So it's an interesting structure, but it also is slightly, we've slightly moved on from it in a couple of different forms, and especially in theater, because in theater we no longer often have an exposition as Act 1. In fact, you mostly find that people will say exposition is death. You want to show, not tell. And that even description of the first act is often seen as, oh no, don't even go there. So just get stuck in and get moving with your story.
I love movies that enter in the first 5 minutes, you're in it. And you don't know everything that's happening, and then we'll back up and explain everything. I think Saving Private Ryan is a good example of, you are in the experience, like just thrust into it with no explanation, and then we're going to back up and basically they like took Act 2 or 3 and put it in right at the very beginning, and then there's like 45 minutes of them talking and building up, but it brought you into that scene. Go ahead, Sky.
And again, that you mentioned, Richard, this is from the 19th century. My understanding is stories, still based on Socrates, way back in the original. So the foundational elements of these are critical. But Alex, to your point, is at what order do we see them now? I think has changed because of the delivery format. And we used to be in a big agora with people, on a tilted auditorium. So that's my thought about. The basic elements are going to be the basic elements for eternity because we're humans.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, but brilliant people do mess around with them a little. I keep thinking of Christopher Nolan and Memento, the idea of starting with the end of the movie and then through flashback creating that story arc has to be filled in from missing pieces as opposed to presented in a linear fashion. So one of the reasons that resume movie for him turned him into a star is he did that in a way that nobody had really done quite the same way before. And it was incredibly effective. So you don't have to be stuck with the traditions of the structure. And one of the things I love about the modern editing things is that you can build your story in a linear fashion now. And then if you have time, play around with it a little. What happens if you put the middle toward the end? And what happens if you take the end toward the middle? And can you make that work? You have tools now.
And what happens if you reverse it like Memento?
Exactly.
Just flip the whole thing. Next question.
Brody Hefner in New York City is up next. Storyboarding is a powerful tool for graphically developing a story concept, whether it's a narrative drama or just a multi-step process. How about a second hour or some after-hours labs on the tools and techniques for storyboarding?
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, story first, which I'll speak to the next question, but this is a way of getting an idea to a group of people to give us all on the same vision in their different departments. So that's the value of storyboarding. It's not the single answer to storytelling. It's a tool to help everybody come along on the journey.
It really pulls out. So my first job in California was at the Star Wars art department. So what I would get were the storyboards from Doug Chang and other folks that would hand me the storyboards. And then my job was to pre-visualize it. So the next step from there is previs, where you're doing kind of a Saturday morning cartoon version of every shot and figuring those things out. And the great thing is that one of the things that storyboarding allows you to do is throw things away before you shot them. Like you get the angles and you talk about it. You do animatics, which are, there's 3D animatics and there's 2D animatics. Sometimes it's just showing them when you see it. And sometimes you even animate it in After Effects. You just do these like little quick, like they're going to move this way, and then it's going to cut back and forth, and then there's going to do this thing, and that can be a very basic one. A lot of us are doing more and more 3D animatics. That's what I got a job doing. And so we would do it, and what would happen is that we were able to think about those things from the whole story perspective before we had a crew of 100 people. Like that's the previs means that you're going to figure these things out, and you're going to figure out, oh, I need something over here, I'm going to need something over there, and you get everybody on the same page to make that work. Because like the original pod race was, I think, 22 minutes long. It was too long. It was a long pod race. It got down to about 11 minutes, and I thought the 11-minute version was the perfect version. But because there was an economy of figuring things out, it got down to 7 minutes. And I felt like for me, it was hard as someone who saw all the other shots to understand. I don't understand if they know they're in the first, the first cycle or the second cycle, or what lap are they in. At 11 minutes you could tell, and at 7 minutes you couldn't. So I think that those are things, but we were able to make those decisions in the edit bay with a handful of people before you have hundreds of people sitting on set waiting for the next shot. And we've had issues where there was a big ship. I had a friend that worked on a movie with a giant black ship, and the director decided on the day of the shoot that they wanted to shoot from the other side of the ship. It was an expensive day, because they basically have to re-rig the entire ship to go the other direction. So it's, those are the kind of things you try to avoid, and the more visualization you do, the better. The less you do those kinds of things.
And Brody, I agree. Yes, I second the second hour on storyboarding.
We'll see if we can get a story. I'm going to get.
Gosh, be brilliant.
This is a good preparation. So Ian McCaig is going to come on in the next little bit of time to talk about story and what he does as well. I was going to have him on this one, but I thought it'd be fun for us to just talk first, and then we'll bring Ian on to talk about that, and he can talk a little bit about that, and hopefully we'll get him on a couple times. But he's if you don't know who Ian McCaig is, just search on the internet. But he's an old friend, and he's gonna come on and talk to us a little bit. Next question.
J.J. McKenna and San Rafael, how important is the order of words in the script versus just ambling conversation when telling a story? Is one method more authentic than another?
Go ahead, Chris.
Absolutely. If you just let people talk, it will be completely authentic. However, it will be very boring. So everything that we do, whether you're trying to learn a craft or write a script, there is a point where you start when you're bad. Okay? Very few people really start great at their job. And as we progress through time, we get to a point where we get really good. And the problem is a lot of people stop there. All right. So getting back to this, JJ, the conversation will be very authentic and the script may be very dry. But there's a point, if you keep going, and most people pull up short, where you can put back the authenticity, but still have it be very organized, very crafted, and not boring. So yes, you could just let people talk and it would be a really boring movie. You could write a script, it could be a good script, but if you really push it, it'll be musical.
Yeah, unless you're Christopher Guest, where you just throw everybody in, you tell them what they need to get to in the other end, and then but that requires such a very limited subset of limited subset of actors you can work with. That's why Christopher Guest has many of the same actors, is because they know each other, they know him, and they're extremely good at just coming up with of stuff off the cuff. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, normally within a script, there's no conversation. There's only dialogue. Dialogue is chosen and specific and designed to get a point and a story across. Normally when you start learning playwriting and script writing is that you get told not to use conversation. Just for the exact points that Chris has been saying is that everything is chosen and chosen for a reason and designed to be there for a point and to move the story and the journey along.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sky.
And again, to Chris's point, the first draft is the first draft. It's usually the worst piece of pablum that is possible. And again, you're telling 3 stories, as I said at the beginning, the one that you write, and you got to work at that. But I'm going to also promote this organization out of Portland, Oregon, the Muse. And it's the Science of Storytelling with Patrick Moreau. And he, again, has taken a lot of the traditional means of storytelling and turned it into a science and a community. But it's been very helpful as a resource in this exact question of putting words in the right order. And it's a lot of work.
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't think there's one answer to this question. And here's why I say that. Some people are brilliant writers and they write almost musically. I mean, you really literally don't want to take the words that Shakespeare wrote and mess them into a different order because it doesn't become the same thing. There are other times, and I run into this because I've worked in or around advertising for a long time, where literally people will take one paragraph and they'll worry it in a meeting for 2 hours and they'll keep changing little rhythmic things and trying to get it as right as possible. And they finally, everybody agrees that this is the right way. And then you take it into the place to produce it. And whoever is voicing or acting that thing, it doesn't work for them. And suddenly they have to make it a part of who they are. And maybe that backwards subject predicate thing that didn't work in the table read works perfectly because of the intonation of that person. What I'm saying is that it's complicated. It's a very complicated thing to get magic out the other end. And you have to let everybody put a little bit of themselves into it, unless it's somebody who writes so beautifully at the beginning that you just want to keep away from messing with their stuff.
I think that one of the things I think is interesting is when you plan it, this gets into the technology of or the technique of shooting. I've worked with a couple of directors that are highly organized about how they're going to shoot, and they're going to shoot the shot exactly as they want to shoot it first. But because they do that, because they don't mess around, there's a ton of pre-visualization. There's a ton of, they know where every jib, every light, every whatever is. When they get to the set, they know exactly how they're going to shoot it, and they shoot that shot. And then once it's in the can, you'll hear this. It's in the can, we got the shot in the can. Now they go, okay, what else can we do? And so then the actors start going, well, I really think I should have done this. And I think I should have done that. And I would have said this. And they go, okay, let's do that. And they've budgeted in both their production time, but they've also made sure at the very beginning of the day or at the very beginning of that scene, of that setup, they've made sure that they got what they needed to tell the story no matter what. It's going to be a great version of that. And they might do 3 or 4 takes of that, or sometimes 30, if it doesn't quite work, but they make sure that they come out with that. But as soon as they get out of that, they don't start rapping. They go, what else did people see in that shot? When we were doing this, what else and sometimes the cinematographer will go, I really saw this. And in one case, we had the editor watching. So they're watching the camera tap and they were like, oh my gosh, if you can just give me a close up right now of his hands, if you can just give me this thing here, if you can. And I love the interaction of that process of having people, playing with it. And something I haven't done that I thought of when we saw the camera to cloud was that the editor could be sitting there. The vision based on that experience that I had on the set, the editor could be sitting editing this together and going, hey, while you're still set up, can I just get this one other shot, an over the shoulder shot, or what? Because they're putting it together and trying to create kind of an interactive experience of building that story together. Because I do think that when you have really talented individuals, you want to let them run free a little bit, but you got to make sure that you still have the shot. Because I've seen other things where we're so creative that we don't actually get the shot that we needed to tell the story, and then you're in trouble. Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael, California. Which artists are storytelling about unique archetypes that tell different stories, unlike the constant repetition of classic literature and themes?
I go, Richard.
Yeah, much like Sky mentioned earlier on, we have been kind of telling the same stories for a long time, especially in the West. Sorry, Sky, it's Aeschylus, not Socrates, who wrote the first plays. Apologies. So it's been very hard to kind of break that cycle. And what it feels like we're getting to at this stage is now a much higher diversity of influence and diversity of talent and diversity of staging. We're moving well past. We've been almost stuck in the modernism, not even postmodernism. We've been stuck in modernism for a very long time. So it's an interesting kind of trend where we're right now getting a much more diverse range of talent kind of coming into both streaming, possibly because of the need and desire for a huge amount of content constantly flowing, plus the ability for us to film ourselves and put it online much more easily allows us to find new talent. So even if you look at the actors from Broad City, the actors from a huge range of kind of new and interesting and edgy programs, everything from Flight of the Conchords, which is quite old now, but a completely different way of telling a story and telling a story from kind of comedic white guys in New Zealand. There's a huge amount of diversity coming through.
And I'm going to start locking this down. So if you're gonna, as a panelist, you're going to read way down because I'm lock. If there's anybody in it, I'm locking it down because we just have to keep moving. Next question.
John Snyder, Reno, Nevada. How do you use common story techniques or structure without becoming cliche?
Go ahead, Richard.
I wouldn't be afraid of structure, and even common structure, as noted. The film uses a very common structure all the time. The thing to be different about is what is your story. Then fit what is the new idea, the new thing that you're trying to say, the new voice that you're trying to get across, and then fit it in within the structure. And then after you've learned that, mess with the structure. Memento, again, is a fantastic example. Just mess and fucks up that structure. I say fucks, not something else. So just mess around with things and play with them. But the key first thing is your idea, the big idea and the voice that you're trying to say.
And this is where talking to other people, getting other people's input, and constantly testing the script with getting other input on it. It's the hardest thing to do as a creator, is to get other people to give you input on what they're doing. I've been working on this story for a couple of years, and I told it to a friend who's a really good storyteller. In fact, they're going to be on. They're starting a movie soon, and they're going to talk to us about it. And he said, "Well, there's nothing going wrong. Like there's nothing there's things going wrong there, but you know that they're going to get out of it, so there's no stress." And it literally, I had to rewrite the whole thing, and now it's horribly dark. It's like DC comic dark. But it was because it needed to have some kind of tension that I didn't have. But having that, being able to talk through it with other people is really important. That's why so many writers get together and hash it out. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Bray, California, and keep your fingers crossed for my pronunciation here. Oh, no, wait. This is different. This is Tlaloc Lopez Waterman, Ocean City, Maryland. Where does the story live and or die, the writing, the directing, or the editing?
Richard?
Because I tend to come from new writing, for those who aren't familiar with the term, which is just new scripts, I would say 90% of the time, the story dies in the writing, as in the concept, the very concept that you're choosing to tell your story about. If it's not right and not great, then all you will do in production is spend most of your time trying to fix the problems of the initial concept. So spend that time on that initial concept, and then it'll make the whole production much smoother.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you can write a great story and shoot it. Like I've seen lots of stories that the editing and the directing was okay, and the writing was really, really good, and it went through it. And TikTok is a good example of not a lot of production value, but people are able to tell really good stories occasionally. So I think that the story concept and the writing is probably the most important part of every narrative. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. Office hours is disrupting in-person meetings and events. What are some unique methods you've used to disrupt common story frameworks with technology?
Go ahead, Sky.
Just understanding that we're humans talking to other humans, and that the eye contact is breaking the fourth wall of the traditional theatrical concept. So you are actually having a conversation, not a pontification. And that's humans talking to humans. Or if you're wanting to do it as a storytelling, then they are observing you talking to somebody else. And so you're putting that fourth wall back up if that's your intent.
Yeah. I think that the framework that I talked about earlier, I think is coming. I just don't think it's quite here yet. People haven't gotten their head around, which is I'm going to use all the platforms as telling the story. And any one of them is interesting and valuable on their own, but they are, and that will take a year of planning when you're building the film of how much, because you have to start, like, here's the thing, is to do that well, it means that when you're on the set and you shot the scene, you shoot the social media part, or you shoot the other part, the TikTok part, or you shoot all those other little sections that are going to add to it. So you're writing it all at the same time. And then while you're shooting, you're putting, it's not right now. The problem is that we make the movie and then we try to figure out the social media execution rather than figuring out the social media execution while we're shooting it, and creating other storylines that, and subplots that are only there for the committed fans. So they get a little bit more out of it. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. Here it is. I'm going to try to get through this fine. What about griot story structures, West African? Stories told orally, as in Anasi folk tales. Opening includes jokes and riddles to engage. Next is narration of the tale, defining the conflict. Finally, there is closure to the story and the moral.
I mean, I think all of these are, I think that they're all related to each other because we figured out a way to keep people's attention. But I don't know the structures well enough to be able to speak to that. So we'll have to play with that. Go ahead, Sky. Can't hear you.
You're muted, Sky.
It depends.
Yeah. I think that we would have to, each one of these is probably, again, this is a subject matter that we could probably, probably spend more after hours. But one of the things I thought would be fun is to talk about it first as a group. And then we're going to start bringing more, like on Thursdays, when we're not bringing in artists to play music or do something else, bring people on that are going to talk about thought process around storytelling and the creation process. So Thursdays are kind of what I'm hoping is you can always expect us to be talking about the art of what we do, as opposed to just the technology of what we do. So that's Monday to kind of so people kind of, Monday's the business of what we do, Tuesday is the audio visual part of what we do. Wednesdays are the visual effects and 3D part of what we do. Thursday is the art of what we do. Friday is the logistics of what we do. And then Saturday is education. So of what we do. So anyway, so those are that's kind of I think sometimes there is a thread. I admit that it doesn't always tie as tightly as I'd like it to, but there is a thread to the method to the madness. Anyway, thank you to the producers. Great questions. It was a really fun conversation, and thank you to our panelists. Of course, we can't do this without you, and really, really insightful conversation here. So thanks for joining us for that. And look at that. Look at those guys in Monterey. And also, so tomorrow we'll have Hedge on. So that should be good. That's more of the logistics of what we do. So it should be very good. And we'll see you all in after hours.
Who looks more like Spielberg, Ittelson or Gleason?